Welcome to the Peaked podcast, where I talk about gender identity ideology and other bad ideas, women's rights, and free speech from a European point of view. All right, so hello, Sarah. How are you doing? I have some questions for you because last week we were chatting. You said something to me. You're from Northern Ireland, and you said something to me very interesting about Northern Ireland, and I decided to poke your brain. Is that the phrase?
Yeah.
Is it poke your brain? That's weird.
Yeah, you poke my brain, it's okay.
Okay, I'll poke your brain. Pick your brain. Pick your brain about why you think it is. So, what you said to me about Northern Ireland is that it's particularly woke, and you said that there were certain circumstances related to the very particular history of Northern Ireland that caused that to be so. So, I just sort of was wondering if you could give me a description of the environment or the atmosphere in Northern Ireland as it is in 2026, just so people can understand sort of when people think of Northern Ireland, they think of generally one thing, but what's it like now and how does it relate to what you were telling me about the situation with the very DEI-ified culture?
Yeah, it seems to me, well, really, Northern Ireland seems to be very much, well, especially in the charity sectors and arts sectors, it seems to me everyone is very super sensitive and no one wants to put their head above the parapet. Jobs in those sectors are few and far between. They're funded a lot by peace money, especially in the voluntary sector. They've just had a massive cut from 25 million down to 9 million. So jobs are quite scarce. And once you're in, no one wants to put their head above the parapet. So no, there isn't an opportunity for anyone to be brave or courageous or say something different. Everyone seems to be
Right, but
singing from
you're speaking about a specific sector. So you're speaking about a sector like the nonprofit sector, arts and all that. But in general in Northern Ireland, like what is the economy like? To what extent are those jobs running the country and what is the makeup of the economy and how significant is that industry? And maybe to ask it in a different way, if I was like a 20-year-old graduate or whatever age people graduate, if I was a 22, 23-year-old graduate and I had some sort of humanities degree, what are my chances? What kind of jobs are open to me in Northern Ireland right now?
not loads. No, because you probably end up going and doing a PhD because there's so few jobs where you go into teaching. There isn't that it doesn't feel like, oh, I sound really down on Northern Ireland, but it doesn't feel like a place of opportunity. We don't have, I feel also, I don't feel like we have a working government here. I know that we have an election next year, and I know the big talking point will be United Ireland or border patrols or whatever, but that isn't an issue that really seems to concern that's in recent polls, that doesn't seem to be top of anyone's actual concerns. Like the government doesn't seem to be listening to anyone, and it just feels like if I had a 22-year-old child, I would get them to leave because there doesn't feel like there's opportunities here. In fact, I was talking to a girl last year who was finishing her degree in, I think it's curation and galleries and stuff. And she says as soon as she's finished, she's going to leave because there isn't everyone who's a curator or working in a gallery. They're not going to leave the job. Where are they going to go to? That there isn't. Once you reach a certain point, you're going to stay there and you're going to wait there until you get your pension because there just isn't.
Right.
Yeah,
And let's say then, just like one step down in the socioeconomic ladder, let's just say is there, in terms of the economy in general, if you graduate from like a 2 year, you did some admin studies or something, are there those kind of jobs like,
yeah,
or is
yeah,
it just, yeah, there's a lot of that, like,
yeah. There'd be plenty within. Like if you were doing in admin, in marketing, there's plenty of jobs like that. There's opportunities for a lot of office-based work. I think if you do any of the STEM degrees, there's opportunities as well there. I think it's definitely the arts and public sector kind of jobs which are a lot more harder to get.
and so we're talking about is like a very small pool of niche sort of jobs with high prestige, and there's a lot of fish in a very small pond, more or less. Is that what you're saying?
Absolutely.
The government, when you say they're not listening to people, what do you mean?
Well, there was an interview on a radio program last week where there's a building which was bought by Belfast City Council for 3 million, and they wanted it to be public use. Now they've specified that in the criteria for other organizations, there's a few LGBT organizations in already within the building, but they've specified for other organizations to be within that building, they have to be LGBTQIA plus friendly. And the councillor, the local Belfast City councillor who was on the radio saying, well, basically was saying, I only really serve people from my community who are LGBT plus friendly.
Jesus.
You know,
It's like a which means turf unfriendly, obviously.
yes, so but if I wanted to go, he is my local councillor. So if I wanted to go to him to ask for help with, I don't know, bins or something like that, I don't think he would help me. So they're not and that's low level. But up whenever I'm talking about our MLAs, which are the equivalent of MPs in Westminster,
Mhm.
we have a justice minister who, we have an enormous problem with male violence against women here. A few weekends ago, a young woman called Amy Doherty was murdered,
Mhm.
and our justice minister was more concerned with a misogynistic pen that an opposing party had produced for their conference. And I think it tells you about the state of things. I mean, even we have 2 years ago, we had a male violence against women, or just a violence against women strategy that was produced, and it was much lauded, floated all around the country, and nothing has. And they kept saying, "Just give it 6 months to kick in." They talk about it like women being an essence, and there's more stuff in it about trans people than there is really about women. They call it gender-based violence. They actually don't name the problem, which is men. And it's
Right, so a few questions to back up then, like what and this is something I've wondered a lot. I don't spend a lot of time thinking about Northern Ireland, honestly. I think it's kind of a reflex from when I was very young. You just sort of all it is trouble.
absolutely. Tell me about it. I know all about it, and a lot of people are turned off by the thought of Northern Ireland. I'm always banging on about a film Alan Clark made. It's only 40 minutes about it, and he made it to talk about really the banality of evil, of stuff that happened during the Troubles, and there's hardly any dialogue. There's 23 murders that happen within this, and it talks about, it's just cold-blooded murder, but it's to show, how like if a newspaper was sold in England with something about a taxi driver being murdered in the streets of Belfast, it wouldn't sell because no one really wants to know. No one really wants it. It's so banal almost, because it was happening day and daily, and, it just became kind of, "Oh, who cares about that anymore?" You
It's
know?
just it was such a mystery place when I was growing up in Dublin, like, as a kid, I didn't know who I was supposed to root for. I felt like I was supposed to root for someone, but it was just it all seemed really awful.
I remember doing a school exchange, and we went down to stay with all these girls in Dublin, and we were just like, "Oh my god, they're so cool." And we went to the Badass Cafe, and then we went to, like, a club, and we all listened to The Cure. We were like, "Oh my god, how can we be like the Dublin girls?"
Oh, really? Is it that way? Did people in the north think that people from the south were cool, or people from Dublin at least?
Well, the girls at the school that we went and stayed with, they were
Yeah.
so cool. They wore flared
Where
jeans.
sounds like you went to a nice part of Dublin maybe. Yeah, I remember I went camping in Fermanagh when I was very young, and I had a best friend for the 3 remember you used to go, like, camping for 3 weeks in one place? It's like lie on the floor on the ground for 3 weeks and think it was a good time. And I made my best friend, who I hung out with all the time, was from Omagh, and we stayed pen pals for years.
Oh, that's
And
lovely.
then yeah, and so that was my only connection. And then I understood from her family name that she was on the other side, like
Yeah.
and that was yeah, I figured that out as I grew up that there was a whole thing, that
Oh, there is.
anyway, and then
No,
there's
but
a
there is.
whole thing.
So what you'd go up to the people, I mean, I didn't do it, I went to like a nice middle class school. You'd go up to people and say, how do you spell out the word who? So depending what foot you kicked with, it was how you spelt the word, or you said the word H. So if you
Oh,
were, I can't like H is Protestant and H is Catholic, or some one of the I can't remember which way round it is. Like, I'm quite lucky because I'm half Protestant, half Catholic, so I can slag them off.
You know what? You know what it's really like. I live in Belgium. Nobody knows anything about Belgium, and also like the thing about it. It's funny the contrast. Actually, I was thinking recently how similar they are because in the north of the country, the people don't know anything about what's going on in the south, and in the south they don't know anything, vice versa. And no, and the funniest thing about Belgium is its ignorability. About like the big joke is like Belgium isn't a real country or Belgium doesn't exist, and it's like nothing comes from Belgium, ha ha ha, which is similar to Northern Ireland's like nothing comes from there except fucking blood and carnage and trouble and
We used to create the best linens, we had the best cigarettes with the Gallagher's factory, we had the Titanic with the biggest shipbuilders, we had all of these things which we don't have anymore.
mhm,
All there's a lot of
mhm,
industry has gone and is left. We have a really high rates of male suicide here, and, there's a lot of men who are left with nothing to do. And I think part of that is like a legacy from the Troubles, like that epigenetic thing which carries through generations, of
yeah.
the trauma, I think, that people feel.
So that's why I was wondering why is there so much male violence against women in Northern Ireland? Is that part of it, do you think?
Well, I mean, it, I don't have the answer for that, but I'd say that definitely could be part of it. I mean, if you ever look at Northern Ireland men on Twitter, and they are vicious. They are more vicious than you'd get, and there's a lot of whataboutery. With the parades and stuff that happened over the weekend, and someone commented something like about the IRA, and then someone had to come back and say, "Oh, what about the UDA?" And it wasn't that. It was just like, look at the state of this. This is 2026. And we have these people marching about, masked up, with their balaclavas and their displays of misogyny, and the men are more concerned with which side are you on. I don't know. There just feels like there's an underlying tension here, you know.
Mhm.
Just I don't know.
So, like, what did you call it? Peace money. It's a little bit like the south of Ireland in that one of the reasons why we got so captured by NGOs, well, one of the contributing reasons about why we got so captured by NGOs is because when we got independence, the church was running everything, and then when the church sort of became less popular, to put it mildly, we needed state institutions to provide services that the church had once provided. Is there any parallel with the Northern Ireland story and that, or is it because you were UK? Did you have, because you know the way the UK has all these institutions and agencies and all this stuff that's existed forever. Like they've
Yeah.
got this bureaucracy. Like I live in Belgium, they've got this really old bureaucracy and there's loads of disadvantages to it, but it means like the state has been built up for a long time. Whereas in Ireland, it was just like the church disappeared one day and then suddenly you had no, you'd no services to provide for poor people or pregnant women or this or that. And then, not that those services were very good, by the way, but that's who took care of those issues. And and in this, we were talking earlier about this Lydia Foy story. We can talk about that again later. But this FLAC, which is a free legal advice clinic, that was one of those, an example of one of those like the government needed to do something to give people a way to fight their legal battles that didn't cost anything. And so this would be an example of one of those NGOs that was set up to help the people that maybe would have been fulfilled by, I don't know, the church, but maybe
Yeah.
nobody before that. So is there any parallel in Northern Ireland with that?
I mean, yes, there is. I think after in 1990, the Belfast Agreement, when everyone signed and everyone was like, their Van Morrison songs and everyone was going, great, it's a brand new country. I believe it was a political agreement and not a peace agreement, and we only have, I mean, I think we need another 25 years to judge how the Good Friday Agreement has really reflected in Northern Ireland. Money poured in from America and the UK, and they're kind of built up all these NGOs, and I'm not and a lot of them you could look at and go, why do they exist? What are they for? Where's the evaluation in the pointless, in the point of a lot of these organizations? I just and we've become, I think Northern Ireland as a population has become very dependent on this money that is being fed. And a lot of people are crying, we want a united Ireland, we want a united Ireland, but they're also crying, why isn't the UK government giving us more money? Because the voluntary sector has just taken a massive cut in funding from 20, I think it's about 25 million down to 9 million, which has come into effect this, I think,
That's
last.
American money, is it?
Oh, that's from the UK government.
Oh,
And
really? Ooh la la.
yeah, and they're blaming people seem to be blaming the DUP for this and Brexit and all this kind of stuff instead of going, well, why don't we try? And so I just feel like there's a listlessness where we've become so reliant on other people to give us money as opposed to being motivated to go out and earn the money ourselves or to try and build these organizations ourselves.
So let me go back a bit and understand. Sorry to interrupt. So we're talking about the so 1998, the Good Friday Agreement is signed. Everyone sang and was happy and was great. But what happened was, I suppose, all those Irish abroad and Bill Clinton types were like, right, let's unleash some funding power to put
Yeah.
this country back into good shape. And the UK was like, right, if we want to make this a success, we're going to have to pump some cash into it. And possibly the Republic of Ireland also, I presume, I don't know. There was also some philanthropists, if I remember correctly, who were getting involved. What
Yeah.
kind of services was that money intended to create, or what kind of support? What was it supposed to build?
Well, I just think build the economy back up. So we have the biggest funder is Peace Plus, and I think it's every 4 years. I can't remember, to be honest. Don't take my word on it. And they fund all these tiny little groups all across the Northern Ireland, just for any old random, like any old random thing, as long as you can pitch it well. And it was also we also have Invest NI, which is biggest focus seems to be golf. And building a tourist of building a tourist industry. Do you know what I mean? Trying to build our tourist economy, which does seem to have worked for whatever reason. But yes,
Right.
there just seems to be so many organizations, umbrella bodies for organizations, like, and I'm just unclear for what their purpose is. You know, I just and I think for me, my personal thought is it's to keep people in jobs, so they could sit there,
Yeah.
they can go to conferences, they can write papers, but nothing ever changes, nothing ever gets done. And I think the consequence of that is because everyone's frightened of losing this funding that they haven't generated themselves, is no one wants to put their heads above the parapet and everything becomes they just want to sit in their silos and they don't want to it's becoming sort of a monoculture, if for want of a better word. Like can't expand or sort of extend itself because they're so worried about protecting their own livelihoods themselves, just sitting out until they get their pensions.
That's the conclusion I've come to about the European Union civil service, which I've worked for, and also a lot of the NGOs in the south of Ireland, because it becomes an entire thing in itself, doesn't it? It's like, here you go. We talk about the end of industry and all the factories shutting down and all the stuff moving to China and all that. And then in its place, we're going to be left with a service industry where we have to look after old people. There's not much else. But this knowledge economy that was supposed to replace it, which is
Yeah.
where the innovation is going to come from people sitting at laptops. There's none of that. There's none of that. What we have, well, in Ireland, in the south of Ireland, maybe a bit more, but most of it, it seems to be state subsidized organizations who claim to represent people and they have nothing to do with the real world. And it does seem like a make work scheme to me.
Absolutely, and it feels like an echo chamber, and all these people, they're all friends with each other. And I know in some sectors, there's double jobbing that goes on, so they're working across different roles. And they like, for a lot of them, I've never seen a public consultation. They just make up things within themselves. These organizations would never speak for me. They seem to speak for themselves and satisfying government. They satisfy the government because they fill in their evaluation forms at the end.
And so I'm reading the Peace Plus website. I'm just having a look at it. And so I can see here it says it's a cross-border funding program supported by the EU, government of the UK, government of Ireland, and the NI administration.
Yeah.
So, and I see the project is let me just bear with me while I just have a look. Gemini project. So this is geothermal energy, okay, health. All right, so it's not just make work laptop stuff. It's actually there's some real good stuff there. Well, Youthscape
Yeah.
in the bin, please. Intercultural cross-border inclusion. Hate that word, inclusion. E-data. Digital transformation, women's reconciliation, common ground. Okay, fair enough, whatever. Who makes the decisions about that kind of stuff? And is that where arts industry, your nonprofit industry would get most of its funding
No,
from?
the arts funding comes from the Arts Council. It could come from local councils as well. It can come from the British Council.
I guess.
Yeah, or whenever I was working in the exhibition side of film industry, it would come from Northern Ireland Screen, Belfast City Council, BFI, and things like that.
Right. And so how close is the Arts Council to the government? Is it a quangle? Is it 100% funded by the government every year or every 4 years or whatever? Or have any idea?
I'm not sure, to be honest. I know whenever I used to fill out funding applications from them, it was like 52 pages for £1,000. So I don't know whether they've
Jesus.
changed that at all. I mean, it would just put you off applying for funding, which is probably the intention.
And how was it that you ended up getting into that then? How did you get to be one of the special ones? One of these big fish in this small pond?
Well, I did my degree. I did a fine art degree, and then I went on and did my master's in fine art as well. And then I started working in a local gallery. I was exhibiting as well. I don't know if you know Eva in Limerick. I did quite a few exhibitions across Ireland and stuff like that, but it's quite hard to financially sustain yourself as an artist. So I had to get work. So I was working.
I hear you.
I know. So I was working in a gallery. I've kind of always worked in the arts, and I was kind of always doing outreach. I worked with Women's Institute and Christian Boys School and stuff like that. I had really good fun actually doing creating ideas to work with different groups of people across the community in Belfast. And then where else have I mean, so I worked there. I worked for Northern Ireland Screen for a little bit, and then I went and I worked in the women's sector for a couple of years. I was asked to come and help reestablish a rape crisis service in
So
Lanc
yeah, so slow down with that for a sec. So how did that happen that you went from exhibiting fine art and then working in on these various projects and then bringing people together sort of type projects? How did this background in rape crisis come about?
let me think, my mind's gone blank.
I
I've
mean,
wo
if it's not an interest in sorry, I sort of just feel like
well,
it's a switch from one thing to something else.
I've always been quite prominent in sort of feministy kind of circles, and women's rights and stuff like that. I've always been quite outspoken, much to my but I've always been and I've always been a big fan of safeguarding and stuff like that. So actually it was my friend who put me in touch with it was an open application as well. And I was kind of in there to help build the business model of it and help to recruit and retain the volunteers for the service. I wasn't delivering the training or anything for it. So I was working on a more practical level.
So when you
And
say it was an open application, you mean there was a call?
for the public to come in and help us reestablish this rape crisis service. And it would be working alongside the CEO of Women's Aid in Northern Ireland, who I didn't know, but actually she's a really good friend of mine now. Um,
I'm
but yes, like I got
between Women's Aid and Rape Crisis Center.
well, no, there was no rape crisis centre. We hadn't had a rape crisis centre for 13 years because Belfast City Council decided to not fund them anymore. And then there was quite famous rugby rape trial which took place, and I think that fired everyone up. Everyone was very angry, and there was a lot of work around consent. I mean, the police here created a campaign around consent as well. It was very good, no means no, and there was a lot of that stuff going on, and there was quite a bit of investment into those kind of services. So I worked alongside Nexus, which is a sexual violence charity, victim support, and men's advisory project to try and bring this together. We wanted to work.
Right, so hold on. Sorry, there's a victim support thing, there's women's aid, there's a men's violence thing, but there was no rape crisis. Is like how were there those other services?
I know. Well, that's what it was. It was to fill that gap. Well,
Mhm.
Nexus, they did counselling for victims and survivors of sexual assault and rape, but the waiting list was 6 months plus.
And why did the council stop paying for the rape crisis service?
Right, it was before my time. I mean, I don't know,
Right.
to be honest, but that was 13 years ago, and there just hadn't been the service in place. But Ironically enough, Emma Watson, of Harry Potter fame,
Mhm.
her and the other celebrities donated £80,000 to help reestablish it. Basically, I was involved in recruiting the volunteers, learning business models from Rape Crisis England and Wales, Rape Crisis Scotland. So there was a lot of input from them as well to make sure we weren't doing anything that would could be deemed a safeguarding failure or anything like that. I mean, it was very thorough. The training took place over 9 months, meeting twice a week for 3 hours, asking for training from all different sectors of different, so it'd be going to, like, a lesbian organization, for example, or going up to the sexual assault center or something like that. Just making sure these volunteers could withstand the sort of sensitive nature of it and deal with it.
And how many cases or women or victims were you expecting to deal with, and how often, and what was your understanding of the need?
Well, we knew there was a need because talking to, whenever you're talking to different rape crisis places in England and Wales and Rowan, our sexual assault centre up in Antrim, they'd be talking about the people who would come through and they'd get treated there. They would do the rape kits and stuff like that. There was a definite need, and I know I know at present they're very understaffed, and I'm not involved with them anymore. I was, yeah, yeah. I think there's a great demand for it.
So it was obvious there was gonna be a need, and just to understand, because 'cause you're talking about 2013 when this was getting up and running, or when it was when were
2018.
you doing. Oh, sorry, 2018, okay. So at that point, like, I'm imagining in Northern Ireland just, like, chock-a-block full of NGOs, all sort of living off subsidies here and there, and some that are very good, no doubt, and providing a great service, and then others, like, is this a common knowledge thing, that it's common knowledge in Northern Ireland that there's a lot of, like, peace money floating around and people are just scavenging, or is that just because 'cause you've been involved in this?
I think people don't even talk about it, because people are so reliant on it, and it doesn't. I think unless you step outside of it, you can't really see. People are so
Right.
stuck in their silo that they can't. There's no perspective or distance to see what is actually going on.
This is quite a big deal then. You're sort of describing an entire economy sort of reliant on injections of cash for a non-profit generating,
Yes, yes, yeah.
and so that creates a climate of its own then, because so this is one of the big questions that I always have, like, why is it that the civil service and the NGOs and stuff, why are they so the way they are? Why is this, like, suffocating orthodoxy? Why in those organizations? Like, what happened in Northern Ireland tell us about the answer to this question everywhere else? Like, why would the people who work in those industries and in the grant making institutions, why is the orthodoxy so strong there?
Because they don't want to lose those precious positions. I think it comes down to something really basic like that. I think they just don't want to stick their head above the parapet and say something different because they've seen what happens when other people get, cancer or something. It's much easier just to keep your head down and just go along with whatever's happening.
Is it also that, like, when you finish school and you sort of say to yourself, right, like, my son has to choose now. He has to. There's a fork in the road. He's has to choose one way or the other. It's the first time it's happened, and he said he's really into economics, and there's nobody in my family who's into economics, and I was just tears in my eyes, almost saying, thank God he didn't say I want to go be a humanitarian aid worker or something, because some woke bullshit, like. And so he did a project recently on crypto money, and I was like, "Yes, like, just do something fucking normal." And even sort of like 10 years ago, I would have been like, "Ugh."
Oh no.
But I'm just like, "Please, yeah, just go do something," like, I was gonna say real, what even is crypto money? But, you know, economics, who's not gonna need that? Like, okay, ChatGPT might take over that job as well, probably quite quickly, actually, but at least, like, I'd be terrified if he said, "I wanna change the world," because I
My
I
son wants
remember.
to you, and I'm so delighted.
He's doing what?
He wants to be a sports physio.
Ah, brilliant. Oh, that's even better. Oh,
Yeah, Norman
oh, that's
Paul.
so good. I'm so happy for you. Like, because I remember sort of thinking when I was young and stupid, I was like, in Ireland, like, also I've come from a fairly lower class family. I didn't have a lot of options when I left school. So it was sort of like everyone in my class, all the girls were going to do secretary college like for a year, or they were going to they left and took on full-time jobs in the hairdressers. And the very fancy ones got jobs in insurance companies, and I'd say they're still there. Yeah. I remember sort of those were your options. And I got a job in a Dell call center, and, I was really fancy as far as I could tell, because I was making loads of money. But I also then there was this, maybe it's not a trope anymore, but there was this idea like do something to help people or change the world or make the world a better place or any of that. And any sort of NGO allows you to sort of say that, doesn't it?
Yes,
You
absolutely.
know, Working in charities gives you this kind of a glow. So is there also that, like, 'cause so you're coming out of school in Northern Ireland as a young person, you can either go into a trade which is physical and difficult, or you can go and quote unquote make the world a better place. Like, so is it attractive in that sense, like to work for these places? Because now I'm just completely turned off the whole scene. I can't even
Oh,
imagine what.
I am too, because I don't see anyone unless, I see like the refugees and stuff are doing day-to-day work, which is really, really important. But there's a lot of it I see as just a load of nonsense. They only speak to each other, but I can see it being an attractive thing for people, especially a dreamer, to go out and go, I'm gonna do this, and then I'm gonna come home at night all smug, because I went to a conference.
Mhm.
Well, I filled in an Excel sheet on how many people attended the conference. Oh, our numbers are up last year. You know what I mean? Well, it's I don't know. I mean,
It's so
I don't
fake.
yeah, I mean, I don't know who can solve the violence against women problem here, but whatever's happening isn't working. Do you know what I mean? And it's just feel like there's real apathy, and people are
Mhm.
just to sit and sit and do nothing. I remember once having a meeting with someone from the women's sector, and it was an important meeting, and it was meant to be less than 20 minutes. And for the first 10 minutes, she kept running about going, "Just wait, I have to find something, just wait." And I was going, "But we only have a limited amount of time." And she came running in all red faced, sweaty, and she went, "I found the biscuits, I found the biscuits." And I was going, "Are you serious?"
Jesus.
Do when we're talking about, helping victims and survivors, and you're more concerned with the packet of Maryland cookies. It was terrible. I mean, I don't know whether I should include this or not, but I had to reapply for my job in rape crisis because it didn't really work with those 4 organizations. There's too many egos. So it was all being subsumed into another organization, so I had to reapply. Now, I was someone who'd worked for 18 months. I knew everything. I'd been over to Rape Crisis England in Wales. I'd gone and met with the funders. I knew everything there was to know, but I'd been quite turfy and,
Mhm.
I'd spoken a bit about Karen and Gala Smith's organization, and she'd actually given me a copy of her policies and procedures, and I was very keen for it to work in that way. But I think there was word on the street that I wasn't I wasn't an appropriate person to be in the sector.
What year was that?
2019. So I reapplied for my job. I was a total shoo-in. I mean, I was, I mean, it's the most, I'm never confident in an interview, but I was so confident. I wasn't overly confident about what I was talking about, but I didn't get it. And they gave it to a girl who had never had a job, who is currently working for Good Law Project. They wanted a certain sort of woman in within the women's sector. There was another thing whenever I had to run the social media for Rape Crisis, and I tweeted something about the Nordic model. We have the Nordic model in Northern Ireland, and it was a terrible story. But someone from another organization within the women's sector contacted 2 other women in the women's sector to have a meeting with me to tell me that I shouldn't be posting stuff like that. You know
Because that organization was ideologically opposed to the Nordic model, or because they
Yeah.
thought you're not supposed to take sides, or what?
No, because it wasn't what everyone else thought within the women's sector.
And what those women thought, where did it come from? Like, what kind of.
It was during I don't know, it was during repeal and all that kind of stage, and I remember during repeal, I was like, "Oh, there's an issue here," because I was on one of the repeal Facebook pages, and some man, or maybe it was a woman, said they were arguing about kinda turfy stuff, and I said, "I'm a woman." They said, "No, you're a person with a womb." And I said, "Well, hold on a minute." And they all kind of went down that path. And there was an organization called the Belfast Feminist Network, and I was banned from it for 3 times because someone posted a Riley J. Dennis video. And I said, "That's disgusting. That's rape." It was about the cotton ceiling. And I said, "That's disgusting." So I got banned. And
Jesus.
yeah, and they
Oh,
they started allowing trans people into the women's to work in the women's sector. And well, I don't have a problem with that, but as long as they don't disrupt everything. But obviously it's disrupted everything, and now everything has become about trans rights and not women's rights.
right. So let me see if I've got this timeline right. Sorry, I'm just going to try and recap so I understand. So there was a need for some sort of rape crisis service in Ireland, in Northern Ireland, that wasn't being filled by the women's organisations that were there. Money was made available. It was decided to set it up. This was in the 2010s,
2018 time.
2018. What did you said something about 2013? What was that about?
Oh, well, that's I finished my degree in 2012, if that helps, or my
I don't
master's.
know. Okay. Well, so 2018, I need to explain to people what repeal is because I have a lot of American listeners and they won't
Oh,
know what we're talking about. So, repeal the 18th Amendment of the Irish Constitution in the south of Ireland, in the Republic of Ireland, because that banned women from having abortions, essentially. So, we had this very lively campaign to repeal that amendment so that it would be possible to have abortions. Northern Ireland has a different law, but why were you, as a Northern Ireland campaigner, having anything to do with the campaign in the South? Can you explain that to us?
well, because it was around the same time we were trying to bring in reproductive rights into Northern Ireland. It was actually with one of my best friends, Claire Bailey. She was working for she was leader of the Green Party at the time. She's still a very good friend of mine, and I helped her with that. There was a lot of organizations that were involved, stakeholders that were involved with doing that. I remember going to a rally in Belfast. Oh, about reproductive rights. I knew there was a problem in Belfast because Goretti Horgan from Derry was speaking, and then a parade of trans people turned up with these signs going, "What about trans people?" And we're talking about abortion rights here.
And was there an effort to combine gender affirming care, quote unquote, in the bodily autonomy? The slogan? No, it wasn't about that. Why were they upset?
Why no, it was me that was upset. I don't think anyone else
No,
was,
why were the trans people
because
showing
we
up?
weren't supporting them. And there was an organization called Alliance for Choice. I don't know if you remember them, and they
Mhm.
were abortion activists, and their logo used to be "Trust Women." It was a lovely logo. And after that, they changed their logo to something it just says A with a circle around it to take women. I could send you the name. In fact, I still have 2 Trust Women T-shirts. But yes, and they've become a very much about trans rights. I don't know if there's more funding for trans stuff now but yeah, and well, I remember even during repeal, and I think it was I can't remember, Tipperary for Yes, and they had a panel discussion talking about reproductive rights, and it was 3 trans women on the panel.
Jesus. Oh,
Oh,
for fuck's
it's so
sake.
ridiculous. But also the other thing was, do you remember you're gonna have to put this in your links. Remember the letter, the feminist ire letter?
Mhm.
Yeah, and that letter, and I was going, "There's a massive problem here. What are we doing here?" Because this is women trying to be liberated from the restrictions to their bodies and not being allowed a choice, to all of a sudden letting men come in and dictate what is happening to them and where they're allowed to go and how safe they should feel. And I think
So
it
were
all
there other so sorry to interrupt. The Together for Yes and abortion rights campaign and Alliance for Choice and all that, those are very much advocacy campaigns where they're like raising awareness, creating messages, political messages, and going out and trying to convince people to vote in a certain way or think a certain way or or vote for the person who'll do X, Y, Z. Was there another layer of services for women in Northern Ireland or in Ireland's Republic that you know of that were actually dealing with the day to day of real people in real bodies needing real things? Or
we
was there convergence?
there was a Mary Stopes in Belfast for a number of for I think it was a couple of years, because Claire was one of the people, who had walked the women in to the service, but she was
Mhm.
always gay. harassed and stuff like that. But no, after we got reproductive rights, and I know BPAS were going to open a house, they were going to have a house here, but in the end, they never did. I don't know whatever happened, so, but it was now you can access abortion services, whenever you need to. But yeah, apart from that, I don't really know.
And so it's safe to say then that by like 2019, 2020, if you wanted to work in the milieu, in the nonprofit, in any subject, you had to be trans women or women, you had to be on board, or was that a bit later?
That's still the case.
Right. And it started around then.
Yeah, yes, maybe even a bit before. I can't really remember. A bit before then. I know last year or the year before, Reem Celine from the
Mm-hmm.
US, and she went and visited, like Cardiff, somewhere in Scotland, London, and Belfast. And I wasn't at the one in Belfast, but she'd invited the women's organizations to go there. And there was a whole hullabaloo online afterwards where they accused her of being transphobic, and because she said it was the only organization she'd been to see in the UK that didn't want single sex spaces. Yay.
Remember that actually. I do remember that.
Yeah.
Awful. Yeah, nothing's been reversed yet, and we can talk about the UK Supreme Court ruling soon. And also, I get mixed up with like which laws apply where. It's very complicated. So if I'm mixed up, I can only imagine how mixed up American listeners are. So basically, the bottom line is essentially that there became this orthodoxy in the nonprofit sector, and those issues, which I don't think are linked really, but there's all sorts of issues across cutting issues that actually have nothing to do with each other, like women's rape crisis and then arts funding, that somehow end up in the same sort of mush, same circle of people. It's the same in Dublin, actually. It's the same people who were working for the free legal advice, went to the rape crisis, went to the women's council. They're all just sort of
Yeah,
circulating around. And then they all end up maybe going to Brussels or Strasbourg or Geneva if they're really good.
absolutely. I think,
And
yeah,
you were saying that. So this is the Kind Brigade, the Be Kind Brigade. Like they're making a living off the Be Kind jobs, yeah?
capital B, capital K, be kind. Yeah.
Yeah, hashtag, yeah. They're basically the "we wanna change the world" guys, but in a career way.
Yes. They're the people that go to rallies and protests in town that say everyone's welcome. But I know if I turned up, I wouldn't be made to feel welcome. It's only a certain group of people who would be made to feel welcome. I know if you turned up in with something Israeli on, you wouldn't be welcome. Do you know what I mean?
Mhm.
It's be kind, it's inclusion with exclusion, if you know what I mean. I think people don't really understand what inclusion means these days, and they take it to mean including only certain groups of people.
And was there a time in Northern Ireland when the word inclusion meant something else? I'm presuming
Oh,
there was.
it meant cross community. That's what, so whenever I say my parents were a mixed marriage, people think, oh, maybe your mum was black or something like that, but it's not, it's Catholic Protestant. But yes, I mean, definitely when inclusion meant, working with nationalists and unionists together, or working with intergenerationally with older people and younger people and stuff like that. But now inclusion is BLM, LGBT.
Trannies.
Yeah. Do you know what I mean?
You don't
Yeah.
have to say that word, I'll say it. Tranny, tranny, tranny. You're gonna get in trouble again.
No, I don't want to get in any more trouble.
Alright, I'll cut that out, don't worry. I'm like the woman who was at the speech, the LWS speech. What was her name again?
Jolene, who,
Yeah.
which, the Britain First woman.
Yeah, you'll be guilt by association again because I say true.
Or someone said I was dirty by association.
Ah, Jesus.
No,
My
no.
God. Okay, so what's the landscape right now? So we have how many? I just, by the way, I just looked up while you were speaking, so I was listening to you.
All
But
right.
I was wondering to how many, because I think this is a good a good indication of the health of the state of an economy. Let's say how healthy and innovative and forward looking it is. How many of the working age population, the working population of Northern Ireland, is employed by the government, and it's 30%.
Jeez. Really?
That's pretty incredible, yeah, isn't it?
Yeah.
And so then we can assume, so it says 27 to 28%, sorry, 28% Northern Ireland employee workforce is in the public sector, which is government related jobs. It's the highest proportion of all or UK countries and regions, significantly exceeding UK wide average around 18%. So I wonder now, are they including all the states subsidized? But I doubt it. It says Public sector employment,
That'll
the
be
civil
civil,
service. Yeah.
NHS, all that kind of stuff.
So it has 40% more public sector workers per capita than England. So that's not a good sign.
No, there's no industry here. There's software and stuff like that, but there isn't really. There's quite a few American organizations that will be here. I can't remember the name of them, but yeah, there isn't really. There's law firms. I can't think of what the jobs are in town. There'd be a lot of softwarey, American stuff like that. But yeah, there's not really. My dad was a business owner. He developed his own businesses. I know another guy in town who owns a really good business. But yeah, that's few and far between, to be honest.
It says here that the voluntary and community sector, the NGO sector in Northern Ireland, employs approximately 53,000 people, which is about 7% of the workforce. So I wonder how healthy that is.
I mean, and the other thing about working in that sector is your contracts, you only get contracts maybe about a year long. You don't get 5-year contracts and stuff like that. Well, you tend not to. You're very lucky if you do. So that's why people, another reason why people keep their head down, because you don't want to lose your job by doing, I mean, and they'll use me as an example. I was on an annual contract, you know, speak up and look what happens to you.
And I sort of thought, remember the Scottish referendum about independence? I thought that one of the reasons why Scotland was so insufferably woke was because they were going to have to. I don't think I was the only one who thought this. I might have even stolen this idea from someone else, but they were going to have to impress all these institutions in order to get into the EU as a separate country and into the Council of Europe and stuff. So there was all sorts of things that they were going to. It's like the accession states now, Moldova and Montenegro and Albania and all that stuff. They're jumping through all these mad hoops. Like I was looking up the transparency register of new organizations that have signed up for access to the European Parliament the other day, and there's a Women on Boards Ukraine, and it's like, what the fuck is like two Ukrainian women setting up an organization called Women on Boards, and it's because in order to join the EU, they're going to have the Women on Boards directive, which is that you have to have at least whatever the quota is. It's a quota thing for women, but because it's so stupid because the text is based on self-identified sex, so it actually means nothing. So this whole thing is just so fucking ridiculous. But anyway, you have to do certain things. Hmm?
I just don't understand what the point of these things. Unless you're doing something which is actually worthwhile, why would you do it? Do you know what I mean? I mean, do these people think, hey, I'm actually really making a change here? I just,
I think there's a real end of history vibe off it, I think. I think that whole period where we were all like, "Oh, everything's been settled now. Everything's been sorted out. We're good to go. Liberal democracy, everything's fine. Now let's just start putting the finishing touches and filing down the rough edges of everything right. More women, like more trannies, like more, let's get some men in wigs on these boards,
men,
like
we're living in a utopia.
yeah, but now that's all over now, and I think everyone's just sort of like, "What the hell did we just we s" they're just, like, building up this house of cards for the last, like, 10, 15 years because everything was going so well, and people are now in ridiculous jobs that they need to save. So
Well,
things are gonna get more ridiculous. So coming back to the fact that there's this orthodoxy in the nonprofit sector in Northern Ireland, what is it about the atmosphere in Northern Ireland generally and the culture in Northern Ireland and in Belfast maybe in particular that made the be kindness so frenzied?
I think that's because we're only 20 years out of the Good Friday Agreement. And we're in this post conflict atmosphere of, oh, we want to be the nicest people in the world. Look, we're never going to create trouble again. We're never going to have paramilitaries. We're really good people. And if we're really kind, then we get more funding. And that's really basic. I mean, there's way much more to it. But you can see, I don't know if you can link to it, the stuff that happened at the weekend. People cosplaying paramilitaries marching up and down the Falls Road. You know, it's not there's a kindness within sectors, but there's an anger within young men, I think, where we have that. People aren't ready to be peaceful, although we've got a veneer of it.
So have we got that same sort of split that we have in other places where you've got these sort of elite 20% of the population who are all like constructing these fantasy land utopias on bits of paper and spreadsheets, and then you've got like the reality on the ground, which is just like a really angry. people who are like,
Yes, absolutely. But there was something funny that happened up in Coleraine at the weekend where they'd said there was going to be some anti-immigrant Tommy Robinson type thing happening. And I don't really know much about it, but I know the papers covered it and called them far right and all this kind of stuff. It may well be, I don't know. But there were all these, the Be Kind group all turned up with all their union flags and all their little signs, saying kind of they looked quite aggressive from what I could see. And I think they've mixed up their kindness. There was something Gay Not Queer posted the other day about militant kindness. And I can't stop thinking about it because it's a bit like that bash back thing that's happening. So their kindness is violent. Do you know what I mean? And they can't
hold
see
on,
any.
because I need to. I'm interested in this point, but I need to make sure that I understand what you mean. They went up with so all the Be Kinders went to Coleraine with their union flags. Are you talking about unionist or Union with Ireland?
Big trade unions like NIPSA and stuff like
Oh,
that.
sorry. Right. So it's the same fucking pattern. It's like we were saying earlier, there's like a script. So the anti-immigration or the less immigration people who have like the folk are out on the street and the proles, and then the elites, they print off their nice banners and they go up and they say no place for hate and whatever. It's the same sort of group of people that were going after you.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I'm just looking at the picture from Gay Not Queer. They'll send it to you. And there's one of them that says, "Be more kind. We need militant kindness. Yes to a tolerant society."
Jesus.
And someone wearing a t-shirt saying, "F the UK. I hate my country." You know, the,
What?
it, yeah. And it's funny. At the weekend, I read, what is this book called? Oh God, I can't remember. It's called Any Human Heart by William Boyd. And the narrator, Logan Mountstuart, he's with this sort of anti-fascist group, and he says, "It's not violence, it's counter-violence." And I think sorry, it speaks a lot to this far left contingency that's happening at the minute. It's just this really aggressive, almost violence thing that I can see emerging. They said that we hate the far right so much, we're going to be aggressive and angry and violent towards anything we can call far right. Do you remember that whole thing? See a Nazi, punch them in the face or something like that?
So we see this happening, but in a different sort of context. It's the exact same thing, but a different context everywhere else. So you have it in Dublin, you have all the lefties, they're all freaks and weirdos. And then you have the Tommy Robinson types and the concerned parents. And I'm not going to judge those people harshly. I only judge the blue haired freaks harshly because they ruin my life. But look, we've had huge issues in Ireland with the centres showed, these refugee centres showing up in towns and villages. So I'm not going to judge how the people there react to them. And
Yeah.
even though
But
there are some very, hmm
it's the bandwagon jumping on from people who call themselves the Be Kind group, and
hmm
then there's the people who are far right. I don't really agree with left, and I think left and right has become too mixed up now, and I think it's
Yeah.
think back to the 60s and 70s idea of what far right and far left are, and,
Mhm.
I think it's sort of become obsolete in a way, but yes,
It's almost like, yeah, populists versus the elites. Like, it's a real, like,
yeah,
you're not listening to us. You've taken all the power and you're just like, that's how I see it now. Like, and but I have to say, like, there are some real scumbags on the right-hand side, but
that's
a lot of, but you know yourself, like, you talk to normal people and everyone is like, steady on now with the L, like, to
yeah.
change in society too quickly. Like, anyway.
The
But
people who cancelled me were middle class. They were
yeah.
middle class people, and like, I don't know. When they wouldn't
So
sorry, carry on.
it's crap. The sound is crap, so we keep interrupting each other. But I'm really interested in what you're saying. Sorry, but I'm just like, I realize that there's like a few seconds delay each side. So we agree then that there's this sort of, it's been this sort of meme or this trope is being repeated everywhere. You've got the fancy people, they've got their nice jobs, they're be kind and to the max, and then you've got the proles on the street, and they're like differentiating themselves from each other. Well, the left, the sort of bureaucratic elites are sort of positioning themselves as the right and true and good people out to find the bad guys. In Ireland, I'm not afraid of like the Antifa people and all in the Republic of Ireland, but in Belgium I am because they're very violent. In France they're very violent. In Belgium they're a little bit violent. And so you think that the Northern Ireland version of this, it has the potential to be more physically violent than in other places?
No, no, because I think they're all quite so middle class. They wouldn't. I think it's the young working class men who wouldn't really get
Right.
involved in any of that. They're too busy cosplaying paramilitaries. I don't think they would be. Well, I don't know actually. They're too involved in building bonfires or doing whatever they do. But yes, it's the people I worry about, not in an actual physical fear way, are the middle class ones that cancelled me. They're the ones that go to the rallies with the trade union flags and with all their matching signs saying everyone's welcome. In fact, they had I could send you the image from it. I just thought it was astonishing. They had everyone's welcome to the country rally. I can't remember what they're called, to counter an anti-immigration march. But they pushed a black woman out of their group because they didn't want to hear what she was saying. And I was watching it on YouTube. Who is welcome to the country? Do you know what I mean? Not the obviously not the black woman, you know.
Yeah.
w-
Is it
no,
home for all? I see a poster here, at home for all,
yeah, but only some.
only some.
Do you know what I mean? So it's like I just so again, it's they've got inclusion all wrong.
So who in Northern Ireland is looking at this problem of the young paramilitary cosplayers and saying, "Shit, we need to do something about that," or are they just calling them toxic masculinity and say I calling them deplorables? What's happening?
There's a few politicians. I've actually noticed Jim Gamble did a really good tweet today about it, going, this is something to be seriously concerned about. He used to be the head of CEOP, which is child protection. And actually there's a few politicians which have spoken out about it. Our Justice Minister I haven't seen speaking out about it. She's probably too frightened because she is in the Alliance Party and they sit on both sides of the fence, if you know what I mean. He doesn't want to offend anyone again. But I mean that it's yes, not offending people. And sometimes I think people need to be offended. Do you know what I mean? I think people have to listen to cold hard facts of what's going on and they're not willing to do anything.
Has this turned into a ye old style Catholic versus Protestant? The lefty be kinders are all Catholics and the quote unquote far right protesters are all unionists. Like, is that
I think if that's the way it's kind of playing out at the minute, if you look at what Sinn Féin are doing across the island.
they're fucking insane.
Exactly. I mean, I wouldn't vote. It wouldn't be a long cold day in hell before I voted Sinn Féin, but it will also be a cold day in hell before I'd vote DUP. Do you know what I mean? I'm looking. There is some politicians that spoke. I mean, I'm very politically homeless. I do think there are two or three politicians who are really good, but they're being shouted down. Do you know what I mean? And people mocking them, and you
Mocking
know,
them for what? Like saying you're a squishy middle, or what are they mocking them
you
for?
used to do this and you used to do that, instead of actually
Oh,
going, actually, this person's a really good idea. Actually, a DUP minister brought in new legislation yesterday for 2 weeks of paid leave for a woman or her partner who have lost their baby through miscarriage. And it's not they don't want to celebrate it because it's DUP.
oh
And I
Jesus.
and do you know what I mean? I think that's a brilliant thing to help women. Do you know what I mean? Why aren't people actually putting their differences aside and going, but this is a good idea and this is a good idea, instead of being so politically entrenched, you know, me and my friend, we always say we'd make better politicians. She says, sitting the arm from my armchair. I couldn't bear them all.
Yeah.
But yeah,
I'm very glad I don't have to be involved in making any decisions about anything complicated like this because I wouldn't be able to. But then I also think like, okay, but you put yourself forward for this job. But some people are just psychopaths and they like the attention, and they haven't got a leadership bone in their body. Like,
and I mean, a lot of people would agree that, even our politicians here would agree that the Northern Ireland Assembly doesn't work.
hmm.
It's very little gets done unless they collapse the government and then they have to push through all their private members' bills all in one day. Do you know what I mean? It doesn't seem to function like it should. It's a bit like the Scottish government as well. It doesn't really seem to function. I know I feel
Yeah.
really bad actually sitting here slagging them all. It's because
Why?
well, I feel bad because, oh, look at me being kind. Because who am I to sit and slag them off? maybe I think I am. Do you know what I mean? I'm just an out cancelled woman, you know.
No, but it's true. I understand in the sense that, like, it's easy to criticize. Imagine having to try to manage it. And I actually just feel sympathy for all sides. The only people I don't feel sympathy for are the people who cancelled you. And I'm
Yes,
trying to hmm?
I was thinking about maybe you could link this as well, Rosie K's Substack from last week.
Yes, of
Yes,
course, yeah.
that was a good thing because I feel like, since I spoke to you last, I feel I have a bit of perspective on it as well, and
Yeah, let's talk about that, but let me just do an intro about what we're talking about. So, for anyone who doesn't know, Sarah was chased out of her job because we cut this out off at the beginning, remember? Sarah was cut out of, or was kicked out, was made to leave her job, forced to leave her job because she basically got bullied for having turfy opinions and for voicing those opinions in public. Long story short, the story is out there online. You can find it on YouTube. The speech that got her into trouble and also the details of her court case. And me personally, I was looking up this story last week, so I spoke to Sarah. And when I found out what Sarah's been up to recently, I was actually so moved by it. I had tears in my eyes because you've gotten involved a little bit in freedom in the arts. Could you
yeah.
explain what that is and what you did last week that made me so teary eyed? Because it was a real comeback, I thought.
Yeah. I mean, well, we have an annual festival that happens in Belfast every year called Imagine or Unimagine, and a couple of years ago, they had a different curator for the festival, and it was very interesting, and they actually had Battle of Ideas held an event at it. But since then, it's been taken over by someone else now, and it's become, ugh, I hate to use it, but it's become very woke. And a panel this year, I can't remember, it's called A Crisis, an Emergency in the Arts, something about cancelling people. Hold on, let me look up the title for it.
Who's afraid of
Yeah, hold on.
something?
Hold on. Working against the clampdown, who's afraid of the arts? And the fear of funding withdrawals to online harassment and institutional cold feet, the pressure on artists to self-censor is mounting. And one of the panelists was a woman who kicked off the cancellation of me by sending an email to my employer saying she wouldn't be involved in anything that I would basically cancelling me. She wouldn't be involved with anything I was involved with, which was strange. This woman I would have considered a friend, someone I'd shared an office, a work office with for 5 years. So I was livid that she was speaking on this panel. And I spoke to Rosie. Rosie came over to Belfast and actually we went to it and three other women went to it as well. And it was on for an hour and a half. Like, I only could get so far into it when she was talking. There was a lot of chat about black drag queens and Trump and DEI being gotten rid of and all this kind of stuff. And she was talking about cancellation. And I said, I just chimed up from the audience going, but you cancelled me. You sent the email. And sort of going on, "But I love you, and I want to take you for coffee." And then it just came down to it, and she said I stood on a platform with a fascist. So that's basically why I was cancelled. You know, she's changed her mind from my views to now I was standing on a platform with a fascist, dirty by association again.
Full circle, just full circle. So she's basically like, "Oh no, but like you're not cancelled. You're still within my loving embrace. But also, by the way, you like fuck you. You spoke at an event where there was some terrible person there that I don't
I'm
like.
so
That's
glad.
cancelling."
I'm so glad I did it. It had given me so much confidence that these people who thought they had burnt the witch, got rid of her. We know she's frightened to go out now. We know she doesn't want to go anywhere. So we can do whatever. We can just resume what we were doing beforehand. But sorry, I think they forgot that I'm really mouthy. But it's funny, she runs an LGBT arts organization called Outburst. And there was an email from her, an email from another woman who worked there, and another one from Caleb J. Roberts, who you mentioned in the Lydia Foy. And they were quite detailed emails saying why I should be cancelled. And I don't really want to go into the Caleb Roberts one because we talked about it in the tribunal. I'll have to wait until the judgment of that. But they were very damning and untrue emails that were sent about me. Like, and that's what kicked off the investigation into me as well. But yeah.
So you're in this room in this like state subsidized sponsored event talking about censorship in the arts and funding cuts, and there's a woman up on the stage talking about censorship and cancelling and just talking to her arse basically. The funding is being cut from those organizations. What's the stated reason? And is it from the UK that's go for cutting it down? Is that what you said? It's the UK, some funds are being cut?
I don't know if their funding's being cut. They keep going on about their funding being cut, but this woman seems to be taking trips around the world and going to meet Brazilian trans women and stuff like that. So I'm not quite sure where that's coming from. Do you know what I mean?
Mhm.
You know,
These women who some of them you considered friends in the past, and a lot of them I'm sure you knew quite well from your years of working and campaigning and stuff. Is that you speculate that that is the reason, that it's simply like covering their asses? That's why they all piled on you, like they're just the need to save their jobs, or is there any other?
absolutely. But the thing is, I mean, I don't know how many women spoke that day, but I was the only one that was singled out. And that's because I think I mean, I'm presuming, but I think it's because I'm kind of quite well known in lefty liberal art circles. Do you know what I mean? I was never
Or
not at an exhibition or never not in the pub or something like that. I was an easy person to go after because I think they could recognize something in themselves. I remember even on the day,
Mhm.
someone came up to my friend Danny and went, "Why are you with that Nazi Sarah Morrison?" And he went, "What? She's not a Nazi." It was just it was outrageous, but I think it was like lemmings or something. They all just thought we're all going to pile on. I mean, another friend of mine was working in a cafe and someone said, "Oh, are you contributing, to the letter writing campaign?" And she
Jesus.
was like, "What?" So there was a woman who did my tattoos was all for doing this campaign to get me cancelled.
Did you have the impression that there was a performative aspect of it? Like, it wouldn't be worth them doing that unless other people could see them to be doing it. Like, was
Well,
it
that's
like sort of like, look at me, sir, I'm
yes, absolutely.
fucking.
Just be like woke points. Do you know what I mean? There's
Yeah.
woke points and it's easy to get rid of. If I'd run my own business or something, well, I don't know, maybe if I don't know. But yes, but do you remember there was Let Women Speak in Dublin a few weeks after that? And a friend of mine was on the bus on the way down, and there was a gay guy in drag sitting at the back of the bus shouting and screaming about how he loved to get gender critical people sacked. And he had got some man sacked a couple of weeks before that. So it was because I wanted to go to Dublin and let women speak, but I was terrified. Like, that was when I was still employed as well. I was like, "God, don't double down."
And this is a weird question, but just because I really want to understand these people, have you ever done anything like that? Like, have you ever felt that, if somebody was saying something that you really didn't agree with, like, let's say, I don't fucking know, like, I feel really strongly about some things. I can't imagine how the
Yeah,
context would play out otherwise. But
like flat
did
earth.
you ever say, hmm?
It's like flat earth or something.
Yeah, or like sort of you found out that someone was like fairly anti-abortion for religious fundamentalist reasons, and you tried
Oh
to
my
squeeze them out of the conversation.
Well, one of my good friends is anti-abortion. I don't mind. I honestly and it hasn't come about because of this, but I'm okay. I just don't thrust your views on someone else or insist someone else it follows your own views because that's not maybe it's because 'cause I'm a Gen Xer, 90s, grew up in the
Mm.
I don't know. I don't really mind. I do disagree with people. I love a good row with people, and that's okay, but I would never fall out with them over it. Do you know what I mean?
And do you think in that field in general, do you think it's more acceptable to be anti-abortion than it is to be pro women's single-sex spaces?
I don't know. I don't know if that's a good comparison. No,
Right.
because they're very pro reproductive rights and pro they would no,
Right.
they're very anti shared space or anti single sex spaces. I
Right.
mean, I don't even think they all agree with it. Do you know what I mean? They all just went along with it. I
It's
mean,
actually it's the most Soviet fucking style, which one that of all of them. So as you know, I've been looking into these stories a lot in the last few weeks because I've had a similar situation myself. So I've interviewed a lot of women. Yours is the most deranged, I think,
mhm, I think it is, and
because of the number of people involved.
I think so too. And if you read through, maybe we could add a link to this as well. Nick Wallace's gender blog, where he,
Mhm.
I think it was his lucky day when he came over, and I don't think anyone realized how crazy my tribunal was. During my tribunal, I was sort of compared to Mussolini. I was they in my discovery, my boss had been calling me Sarah Palin, but in court said, "Oh, we called her Sarah Palin because she was fun and bubbly." And then a public board member compared women like us to armed dissidents. I mean,
Fucking hell.
it was I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Instead of going, "Actually, hands up, I made a mess here," they've just all doubled down. But I do think their reasoning of now they've actually watched what I said at Let Women Speak, and it's quite innocuous. It's actually quite boring. They're now saying, "Oh, it's because I stood on a stage with Kelly J. King and that Britain First woman that I didn't even know was there. That's the reason now that I
Of
am cancelled."
course, yeah.
So it's like they're trying to find reasons to find out why, to be sure of why they've cancelled me instead of going, "I'm actually maybe."
The maddest thing I think is that your speech was primarily about including everybody.
Well, yes,
That's what it was about, wasn't it?
well, I tell you what it was, and it goes back to funding. That because a lot of people have been talking, "Oh, we're Kelly J. King's coming over." It was just after whenever she had got the soot thrown over in Australia or New Zealand. So it was quite tense for her, but everyone knew she was coming over. So the women's sector, they organised a thing called Songs for Solidarity,
Mhm.
which was a bit like the Tom Harwood thing in Scotland. And they got all the women's sectors. They made all these posters with all the organizations' names on it. We're all going to go to a different location. They didn't know where Kelly J. King was going to be. So they decided, well, it's going to be the one obvious place, Ryder Square. So they set up this big tent. They got speakers, this big gazebo thing, and like a sound stage. So they were all going to sing fun songs to drown out these horrible women. And on the day, it took place in a different location. They abandoned their stage and their speakers,
Jesus.
all and they come over to where we were, and they were so loud and all dressed not there was it was just mad. There was, like, counselors, like, local counselors and everything there. Loads of people I knew were, on the counter side, and it was kind I knew more people on the counter side than I did at Let Women Speak, and I just found it really, like, this is really, really weird. Like, they kept coming closer and closer, and the police were fantastic. They'd set out barriers, and they kept pushing them back when they kept trying to encroach in our space. And then they deployed another couple of vans of police. I mean, they were amazing, the police that day. And they were saying to us, if you see anyone, let us know and we can get them out. But they
But
were all like so
all you were saying in your speech, and you were very brave to do it considering that you knew so many people on the other side, but basically all you were saying was like, "Look, if you're receiving money from the government to represent women, you have to include all women," isn't
well,
it?
yes,
That was my
absolutely.
understanding.
They were using government funding to pay for a that stand and that speakers and that
No.
came out of government funding.
Are you
That didn't come out
serious? Of course it
of
would have, yeah.
You know, that's what really, really annoys me. They'd organized Songs
Fuck.
of Solidarity. This was like I don't want to name them all again. I don't wanna get in more trouble, but you can you look up Songs for Solidarity and you can see exactly who it is. Then they use government funding to pay for all this stuff to stop women speaking, and I find
That
that's
is
the most
fucking mental,
it
the tone of the mission, like,
yeah, and that's the thing that really, really annoyed me is, can you not see what you're doing? You're stopping women speaking. And that woman from Manchester who spoke about breast cancer, people's actually speaking about their real life experiences and they didn't want them to speak, you know.
how do they not see that they look like monsters is my question. Like, how what goggles have they got on that they look at that scene and say, "Oh, we're the good guys." And I actually think, 'cause I've been to so many of those events now where you just sort of like I see this sort of anxiety in some of their faces, like, maybe we're the bad guys. It's like,
I don't think they questioned it at all. It was funny, was it
no.
that year? I can't remember if it was that year. It was International Women's Day. In fact, it was that year, International Women's Day, which had become smaller and smaller and smaller because they only want some women there. And they all shout about trans rights on International Women's Day at this public sector, this fund, this women's sector kind of thing. And a black woman from Sligo got on the stage and started talking about biological women or XX women or something like that. And she was taken off the stage and they sang trans rights and human rights.
For
Interna
fuck's sake.
International Women's Day. Do you know what I mean? And I just like these people, even the Reclaim the Night thing is all men and like even like trans women are one thing, but the men as well. Because men feel really, men shouldn't feel comfortable going to any of these International Women's Day. They shouldn't be at any of them. They shouldn't be at any reclaim things, whether they're dressed as women or not. Do you know what I mean? They just shouldn't be there. This is a thing for women to feel brave. You know, that's if I ran
It's
it, that's what I would do.
It's so crazy. So basically all the women's organizations funded by the state in Northern Ireland are trans women or women. So they've basically inverted their missions. So their priority has become to do this one thing because we don't care about men who wear dresses. We care about when they're in our spaces, when in particularly vulnerable situations. And so they've basically focused their mission now on making sure those men can get into those spaces where women are vulnerable. And that's sort of taken over their.
Absolutely. There's another thing that happened during my cancellation is a woman who runs a domestic violence charity in Belfast created a fake account on Twitter, and 2 or 3 times a day was tweeting pictures of me, links to Let Women Speak, tagging my employer, my ex-employer, tagging all the funders, and that went on for months and months until J.K. Rowling tweeted me. That's how bad it is. The police actually went and spoke to her as well. But yeah, that's how corrupt I feel that sector is, so entrenched they are,
And
we're
what
gonna
can be
do
done? Like, I know we're not the solutions people, we're just the ones pointing out problems, but
it's all
what
up, throw in the bin and start again. I think
yeah.
you need to be I would even start with saying you can only have one job within that sector. You can't be working across the sector in different roles. I
How
think
how does that contribute to the problem? You mean double jobbing, like,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
or
Like working
alright.
for one organization, then working for the other. So there's really 10 main people working across the thing. Do you know what I mean? All over the place. Do you know what I mean? And you shouldn't be on boards of different organizations. I think you focus on your job. You don't do this whole, well, I'll be on the board for there and then I'll work in this job. Do you know what I mean? Because it's the same people just talking to each other. There's no new voices. There's
Mm.
no fresh voices. There's no one new unless they are complicit with their way of thinking.
I think the way that we're gonna get out of this in other countries, in particular Ireland, I think Ireland is very redeemable. Sorry, I keep saying Ireland as if you're not in Ireland. Sorry, I don't politically I don't even know what I'm supposed to say. You're in Ireland. In the Republic, I think the way this is gonna be fixed and in elsewhere is that I think our conservatives are gonna go back to being a little bit stop being so center left. Due to pressure from the populists, I think is probably gonna happen, and I think generally in Europe, there's just gonna be more right wingers making up governments, and I think it'll all be kind of undone, and nobody will ever apologize, and it'll just be like because one of the reasons why I was so interested in your story is, like, the influence of state subsidies in the creation of the organizations that have the legitimacy to cancel people, so this is such a huge problem in so many places. Myself and 3 other TERFs have been writing opinion pieces to the Belgian press recently, and then every time somebody responds to us to call us terrible people, it's a big long list of associations and NGOs and groups and support groups and stuff, and every single one of them probably has, like, 1 or 2 people working for them, and they're all, as you say, like, all speaking to each other, and then they have the time to sort of contact academics and say, "Do you want to put your name to this letter? Do you want to put your name to that letter?" But literally, there's a facade of consensus around these certain issues because these places are actually registered as registered NGOs or nonprofits or charities or whatever. So you're given this impression that, first of all, these are people who speak for the people, the civil society. They're a stand in. And the reason they exist is because the government keeps giving them money. So a few years ago, the height of like the BLM and all that stuff and the trans rights stuff between 2020 and 2023, I would say the funds were endless. But so one day there's going to be enough right wingers in government and the conservatives are going to snap out of it due to pressure and to win votes. And I think that the funding will get cut and those people will disappear. The problem in Northern Ireland, I think, is that the last thing you want is some sort of right wing government because that looks different in Northern Ireland than it looks elsewhere. Is that correct, or have I got it wrong?
Well, I mean, whatever we're talking about right wing here, we'd be talking about the TUV. And the TUV have really spoken up in defense of women's rights. I'm not really sure what any of their other policies are, to be honest. But we have the Ulster Unionist Party have also always spoken up for women's rights as well, and that would be where I would tend to lean, and they would be right of centre, and they seem generally pretty sensible. But yeah, I mean, it's funny that the latest funding cuts they're blaming on the DUP, and it's just easy for people to do that instead of actually looking at, maybe we're actually not doing enough. Maybe we're not
Mhm.
producing the results we should be. Instead of looking at themselves, it's so easy just to blame someone else. It actually makes
Mhm.
me actually getting really angry thinking about it because everything you just said there is so correct. We really need to see a change, like a sea change in what's going on here.
And I think that in Republic of Ireland, I think this recognition that NGOs are really fucking things up, like, they're really interfering with the democratic process. They're really making, like, a big making difficulties, like, they've become an extension of whatever ministry is keeping the funding going.
I think, yeah, organizations like Tenny have done nothing but create problems, and I think that
Mhm.
if you can only put up with it for so long, and then they go, "Actually, no, hold
Um,
on, it's just gone too far." I know Gordon Lyons, our Minister for Communities, he's DUP, and he has stopped a lot of lobbying coming into Stormont, which is a really good thing because they were lobbying for to change the toilets to shared and stuff like that. So DUP as well would be quite sensible on women's rights. And it's funny, and people can't seem to accept they were anti-gay rights, they were anti-abortion and stuff like that. But once the law passed, they accepted it, they moved on. And now they actually do see, and it's really, I find it really weird from this real cognitive dissonance for me, sort of supporting DUP or TUV or Ulster Unionists or something like that. Because it's really freeing to be I think it's freeing to be a TERF because then you can say whatever you want and I
yeah.
don't care about being cancelled anymore, but also it's freeing being politically homeless because then I can go, I like what they're saying, and without having a prejudice, although I do have a prejudice against the Shinners at the minute because I think the top
Mhm.
sounds in their mouth, you know. But yes, I'm open to all, and I think while the last 3 years have been pretty awful, I like the new me, where I'm not relying on a purity spiral.
You're very inspiring. Your story is super inspiring. I hope more people get to hear it because you did. I didn't even know that you knew more people on the other side of the protest
Yeah.
barrier than you had to let women speak event. That takes courage. So fair fucks.
I was trying to chat to them, "Hi, how are you?" And they were like, "What?"
And they all look miserable, don't they?
Trans joy, trans joy. I know, but there's
Um,
a real lack of sense of humor that you get from the trans activists. They're just
yeah, and I mean, it's the opposite of you're laughing and you're free. Like you can say what you want and you can say and I love this idea that you can pick and choose from what policies and what laws you think are
yeah,
good and bad and you're not it's very miserable to be
yeah.
mind controlled like that.
Perhaps it is, and it is mind control, and it does feel like they are living in some sort of communist Russia kind of thing, where they go, well, no, everyone thinks like this, so I have to think like that. How boring's that?
Would you consider writing a book about it or anything?
Oh, don't. My friend Dee's been banging on at me about doing that. But no, look, I'm sorry to refer to it again, but that William Boyd, you should read it if you haven't read it. It's called Any Human Heart. But there was a great bit right at the beginning where I'm just going to read one line from it. He's talking about religion. I'm actually not of any religion at all. And he said, it was all a bit obscure to me, and now I understand why I don't give religion much thought. The awful boredom of uncritical faith. All great artists are doubters. And I thought, isn't that great? And wouldn't it be
Mhm.
great for the arts sector to listen to that? There's just a bit of critical thinking who take people a lot farther, if they weren't such, oh, I'm gonna do it because everyone else is doing it. Do you know what I mean? There's a
Mhm.
real cowardice in it.
I
And
would love to see a natural experiment where all funding was gone. It was shrunk. Our sector was shrunk down to a much tinier size. Would it replenish with critical thinkers and doubters, as you quoted there, or would it again just turn
no,
into a different type of purity spiral based on pleasing different gods or leader? No.
it would be fantastic, it would be subversive, it would be what art is meant to be. These that Can I just say one more thing? But, like, I think curators and funders, CEOs, they seem to have become the more important person when we're talking about art, when the art is and art seems to be now themed. There's very rarely you get into an exhibition now where it isn't about climate change or
Mhm.
Whereas exhibitions you used to go to were about this style of painting or, from a certain period or something like that. Now everything has to have a theme and it all has to fit in the eye.
And it aligns with the policy of the government. But there
Yes.
was I don't know, because I don't know anything about art, but I do feel like when I don't know, at some points, right, art has always been political, you can say. But then at some point people started vocalizing that, saying art is political, art has to be political, art is always going to be political. And then when it became maybe a political vehicle, then governments sort of said, right, well, we should take advantage of that.
Yes.
I don't know, is that how it happens?
Yeah, no, that is definitely a part of it. I mean, you don't there's not the art for pleasure really anymore. Now everything it has to be good in. I mean, I haven't seen actually I saw the National Portrait Gallery in Scotland was amazing. But these exhibitions now seem to be dictating you need to think this way.
Mhm.
You don't come out there feeling, oh God, that was amazing. I saw these beautiful, I don't know, I love Caravaggio. It has to be this is about gender, we're going to push something really offensive in your face. And it's offense for the sake of offense as opposed to,
I swear to God, I walked into the closest art gallery to me not long ago. I bought a packet of Maltesers and I was like, I'm just gonna go wander in and see what's there as on my way home. So I wander in my shopping bags and my pack of Maltesers. I swear to God, the first thing I saw was a floor to ceiling size obese fucking drag queen. That was it.
it's so boring. It's so like art is there to challenge. That is not challenging. It's just boring. It's so, so boring. You're just fitting into I mean, when did we it's so embarrassing that art is now fitting into some sort of socially acceptable, oh, this is what people want to see in a gallery. There's not people don't want to see that shit in galleries anymore. People are done with it. You want to be provoked in a way that challenges you to think a different way. Not big wall to wall drag queens. We see them every day.
Fucking sick of drag queens. If I never see another drag queen for the rest of my life,
I'll be
it'll
happy.
be too soon.
Do you remember drag story time?
Ah, yeah, we still have them in Belgium.
No, you're joking. They're the worst. Someone said, "Why don't we?"
Yeah.
I can't remember.
It's all
It's
propaganda, isn't it?
you get stripper story time now for children. It's ridiculous.
Don't give
But
them ideas.
I do think we're over. I think I don't want to. I'm touching wood here, but I think we're over the worst of it. Do you know what I mean? I don't know whether it's because I'm.
Yeah, you say that as a technically as a subject of the crown. Where Ireland is still we're still at the mercy of what the EU thinks about our performance in the woke stakes, whereas you're maybe a bit freer from that. I don't know, but we shall see. But the thing is, as you say, it's absolutely ridiculous to have the themes of art dictated by anyone. And so if you as an artist can figure out a way to appeal to people who are actually interested in arts, yeah, for, arts, not propaganda, then I think you can probably have a very successful life, but you're probably fucking over all that now, are you?
Yeah. Yes, I was on a panel with a guy, lovely guy, Sean Corby, and he used to work for ACAS, the trade union, and he was cancelled because they said because he didn't believe in critical race theory, so they called him a racist. Try and tell that to his black wife. Do you know what I mean? It's yeah. So the arts are. I know publishing is a complete mess. My sister works in publishing, and it's
Oh,
you
no.
can't say anything, but we'll get there in the end. Do you know what I mean? It's just
Yeah, yeah.
terrible that it's the arts which seem to be so entrenched.
Yeah, but the market will reassert itself, like, that's just sort of it's taken longer than I thought it would, but, people don't like what they're seeing and hearing,
Oh, all right. Even film festivals with these whole things about climate change and stuff. Like I don't want to be
"Ah,
lectured to.
fuck off."
You know what I mean? I
Yeah,
want something fun. I
yeah.
want something silly. Look at me. All I want is a rom-com. What are you joking?
Ye Well, yeah, or just like a day off for your brain,
Yeah.
or also a way to come to different conclusions and not foregone conclusions that have been laid
Yes.
at your feet for you to
Like, I think things should be self-care, not a constant, like, you're living in blue sky or something,
uh
I don't know. It
blue
amuses
skyfication of the Northern Ireland art
yes,
scene. I think that's a
yes.
good
I mean,
sub
I was just thinking the other day, our local Green Party, they have vacated Twitter for blue sky, and we have an election next year, and I'm really curious to see if they come back, the voting time.
'cause that's where Yeah, that's where everyone is, isn't it? And they want to speak to where everyone is. They want our audience. So
Yeah, there's no engagement in the Big Sky. It's just people all just agreeing with each other and then getting shouted
it's
at.
just circular firing squad. Yeah. Okay. I'll let you go. Talk to you soon, Sarah. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you so much. I really enjoyed that. I feel like I got a lot of, felt like a little therapy session.
Did you? Well, maybe like as things progress, we can get back on and talk to me again about how things go, especially if there's it's always elections and funding cuts are interesting
Yeah,
times, you know?
yeah. And maybe after my tribunal judgment, whatever that's going to be,
Yes.
I don't hold out too
Yes.
much hope for it because of Northern Ireland. But we can hope.
Well, we'll make as much hay out of the situation as we can anyway, at least as a case study for to demonstrate the awareness raising, as they say.
Absolutely. They're a little bit of awareness raising.
Fair play to you.
Yeah.
I'll talk to you soon.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Ciao, ciao.
Bye.
Bye. If you like my work, you can subscribe to my newsletter by going to peaked.substack.com and taking out a paid subscription.